Thanks for coming. When I looked in the thing, it said 7 people signed up, so there's more than that. That's good. First, I'm fucking tired. How about the Cubs, huh? I'm actually not a baseball fan, but it was fun to watch. So maybe it's time for my Vikings, right? Like, we haven't won shit, so no. Where's all the booze? Oh, I can't wait to play Dallas. So who am I? Kelly explained it very well. I've been around a while. I'm with Invisium now. Lots of consulting. I go by Golf Hacker Dave because I hack and golf usually at the same time, but I still try. So this is the stuff we do, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm here to do today is talk about your apps, your mobile apps, and we want them to look kind of like this, right? Big fortress. You know, being the security guy, I'd probably recommend putting a moat around it. You know, there's not one there. But, you know, we want to talk about that instead of looking something like that, right? No, thank you. But this is kind of where we're at. So first person to tell me the answer here wins the prize. What is this? No. Close. That's always the first guess, though. No. That's a sweet elevator. It's a vault. Okay, I'll give you that hint. It's actually the vault in the basement of the Federal Reserve in New York. Okay? The reason I bring this up is this is how I picture mobile security and what we've done. If you notice, this vault looks pretty old, but it is. But it's very highly secure. My pointer doesn't work. Anyway, you can see all the way in the back. That actually is like a locker room. Seriously, there's lockers way in the back full of gold. It's not our gold, it's all the other countries' gold. But the fact is that this door, this big door here, it takes 2 people to open and close it. They've got to turn the wheels at the same time and it rotates. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. That's pretty secure. You need 2 people. It's down in an area, there's no I mean, it's way down there. But I think of this as mobile. Instead of this massive rotating door, we're throwing a screen door on it. Right? We're taking our already established infrastructures that we've pen tested for years and still can't get SQL injection right, but that's beside the point, and we're throwing mobile at it, right? So now that's opening a whole nother world of attacks, if you will, for numerous reasons, and we'll kind of get into that. Disclaimer, the usual, please don't just go download and start banging on this stuff. Unless you have permission or bug bounties or whatever else. So what I want to talk about today is some fingerprint use cases, talk about iOS Touch ID history, talk about the APIs, which there's not many, but we'll talk in depth about them, and show you some demos and examples. So what are some use cases for the fingerprint readers on our mobile devices? I like to be interactive, so, you know, if we need alcohol or something, let's step it up. Well, I could send someone. So throw it out. Throw some use cases.
Well, it's just convenient, just a regular, not for extra security, just to open up the device.
Okay. Device unlock. Anything else?
Second factor.
Okay. Cool. Anything else?
Transaction confirmation.
There you go.
Oh, and then also in like a session timeout, like for some.
Sure. Sensitive storage, maybe. Lots of use cases, right? It's very, very convenient. Very easy to use, very easy to set up, very easy to program for it in your apps, because there's really not a whole lot of options. So Touch ID history, it goes back to 2012, at least with Apple, right? Biometric sensors and stuff, they've been around forever. But for Apple, 2012 was kind of their big point. They acquired Authentic, and at that point, the fanboys just went nuts. Oh my God, we're going to have fingerprint readers on the next iPhone? Well, sure enough, they did. So in 2013, when the iPhone 5S came out, it's like, oh yes, Touch ID. Oh, by the way, you can't use it in your apps. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, well, we'll just wait longer because I'm sure Apple will allow us to do that at some point. So they did. In iOS 8, now the apps can use the fingerprint sensors, and everyone goes crazy, and every app now uses it. But you know, the documentation is absolute crap. Specifically for iOS. Has anyone ever looked? It's an app. It's an app. Here's our documentation. Use this app. So anyway, so they've made some changes, since then, and now it integrates with the keychain and secure enclave, and but it's still bypassable by typical fingerprint attacks. Or voice, or what? Oh, I can't Google. God, don't get me started. So I have this little video here of some unsuspecting person at a con like this. Took a nap. That's pretty easy to bypass. He's just trying his fingers. Well, guess what? It's not working. Why would that be? Uses his foot.
So you're saying security my foot?
Right, yes. So you should all use your footprints instead of fingerprints. So anyway, Touch ID technology, it hasn't changed a whole lot since the first one. It's built into the home button, even though the home button's a little weird now on the 7. It's still sapphire crystal, pretty darn strong as far as scratch resistance. It uses capacitive touch, so it's not just an image. So you can't cut someone's finger off and then go try to log into their device, right? And it's tied at the hardware level, which is very interesting and good from a security perspective. What that means is I can't go steal your device, grab your chip, and put it in mine, right? I need the chip and the fingerprint sensor all in one because it's tied at the hardware level. So if one goes bad, for instance, you got to replace the whole gamut, which they'll just say buy a new phone.
But it's not secure enclave tied, right?
No, it's just tied at the hardware level, correct. So how does it work in iOS? So you must set up Touch ID and your fingerprints at the iOS level, at the OS level. You don't do it through the application. It's a yes or no technology. You either succeed or you fail. There's really no in between, like, oh, you almost got there, dude, try again. Right? And we'll talk about that here as I go through this. But there's only 2 APIs that they started with in iOS 8, and they changed a little bit in 9 and 10. They really didn't make any changes. But there's LA Context and then user presence. Anyone here use Touch ID in their apps? Good. Garbage. So this is typical pseudocode. 90% of the apps I look at and review have code that's similar to this. I wish my pointer worked. So if you follow this code along, you see you have your LA context. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to check to make sure that the device can actually use Touch ID. That makes sense, right? That either has to be enabled or available on that device. And then it's going to evaluate. And that's when you get the little pop-up and says, hey, enter your finger. And then you basically get a success or failure. So most apps take that, and if success, they do something. Authenticate you, right? Or if it doesn't, then they do something else. Anyone see a potential issue with this flow?
It's a little hard to read, honestly, in that light.
Yes.
If you can make it believe there's no fingerprint scanner, then
So that's really close. With iOS, from years and years of hacking at it, you can run stuff out of order, right? If I'm able to connect to the app, I can run methods, I can instantiate classes, I can do things out of order. Does that give you a hint? Anyone? Not you, Jack. You don't count. So if you look at this code snippet, I'm going to run through a couple examples. It's the same flow. Checks whether a device can actually use Touch ID, evaluates the policy, gets back some value, and what I'm doing here is that if error, show error, if success, show success. Well, what's stopping me from connecting to the app and just running show success? Now that could be authenticated. It could be something else. I'm not even getting prompted at that point, right? So what does that look like? Well, I wrote a really crappy app. Please, no comments. I'm not a graphic designer by any means either. And hopefully this shows up. If not, You guys can't see that. Here, let me run the actual GIF and see if that works better. That means I got to find it. Talk amongst yourselves.
No Kelly, sorry.
That's over, right?
I know. So yesterday, wait, this morning.
All right, I think it's this one. Yeah. It was late last night, wasn't it? Does that look any better? So I'm going to walk through this. So what this is an actual iPhone 5S device that's running my crappy app. And I'm going to connect to it over USB iProxy. Anyone use it? Allows me to actually do things at a conference without connecting to Wi-Fi. But I videoed it for good reason. So I'm going to connect to the device. Now this is jailbroken, for those of you that may ask that. And you do require jailbroken or rooted access to be able to do this. So I'm going to find the process. Man, that does not show up, but what can you do? Search for the actual app process. And then I'm going to use Cycrypt. Anyone use Cycrypt? No one? Man. Cycrypt allows me to attach to the running application and invoke methods, instantiate things, look at memory, all that good stuff. So I'm going to connect to this running app with Cycrypt. Cycrypt allows me to use JavaScript and Objective-C. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. This is normal use. I touch the Auth 2 button, use my finger, successful. If I use the wrong finger, I'm not successful. And I get cancel, and it says, hey, you failed. That's it. That's what my app does. Show error, show success. So I'm going to invoke them directly from Cycrypt now, bypass using the app at all. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually trying to figure out what my current view is, because that's the way iOS works, right? You have a current view at all times. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to look at the recursive description and grab some memory address that is in here that you can't see. And then I'm going to get the next responder for that memory address. So like, for instance, maybe one of those is a button or a label. And then I'm going to get the next responder until I get to the point where I know that's the controller I'm looking for, which in this case is just the current view controller. And in there, here, I'm going to pause it. What I did was I'm able to dump the actual methods that are available to me that you can't see. But these are actually the methods in this view controller that now I could invoke, okay? So it's telling me all this just by connecting to it. And one of those methods is either show success or show error. So I can now directly run those methods with Cycrypt. And that's what I did here, right? As you can see, this is the memory address of the view controller with Objective-C notation, that's the bracket, show success, run it, pop up, show success. I didn't have to do anything with Touch ID, just went right around it. So if you're using that method, that's probably not a good idea. So let's close that out. And we'll go back here. So what's another way that I see? Well, but what if I just pass those values to some other method? Well, that doesn't change anything. It just makes it a little bit harder for me to actually invoke that. So this is very similar to what we just saw. I'm checking to see if the device can actually use Touch ID. And then I'm going to evaluate the policy if it can. Then I respond with success and error. And what they're doing here is they're passing those values off to show local authentication result. And then it does something. So these are the two main ways that I see people using, because frankly, it's copy paste out of the Apple app that they provide you. So I'm not going to show this one. It's just very, very similar. I connect to the app, get the current view, figure that out, and invoke that method. The only difference is I now have to guess what the parameters are, because as you saw there, that method, it takes in two parameters. So the easiest way to do that is either one, use Boolean values, or use the nil value. And just try those to see which one's going to work. Because I don't necessarily know what objects or what values that method is expecting. But it still does work. So then I get the smartass who says, oh, well, I'm going to do it this way. And I'm going to completely ignore all OO. And I'm just going to write the code 75 different times in 85 different places, right? So I'm just going to do if error. I'm going to do everything I want to do in here with all the Apple built-in stuff. Don't do that. It doesn't solve the problem, right? So who uses it? Who uses LA context evaluate policy? Don't be shy. We all probably have, yeah. How about Cordova, Ionic? Anyone? Anyone? No one? Does that look familiar? This is in NG Cordova. So this is what Cordova provides to you to use Touch ID. It's the exact flow that I just went through. And actually with Cordova, that's the only one that they provide to you. How about Xamarin? Same thing, right? Now, Xamarin at least calls it kind of what it is. It says this is local authentication. But they say, add the following code to your controller. Copy, paste, wham, bam, you're done. So what do we do about it? Any ideas before I go into them? None? Kind of mentioned it before. There are some if you have to situations, right? There are reasons that I can't think of right now that you may want to do local authentication. So there are ways to, I guess, hide it better, security by obscurity. You can define private methods in Objective-C, but what does that mean? It means absolutely nothing, right? They're not actually private. I can still grab them, run them. The biggest one is to avoid static discovery. So basically, Objective-C is a static language. I can run strings against it. I can print methods, and I can get all that info very easily. You can avoid that by using dynamic method resolution, which is basically the difference between this and this. So it's old C notation instead of what we're used to in Objective-C. So all that really does, though, is it turns on dynamic resolution for that method, and it doesn't really show up in searches, even though it's there. So again, it's kind of hiding. So there is some differences, though. The print methods that you couldn't really see before, where I was running against the actual app to see what the methods were in the view controller, it does look different if you use that dynamic method resolution. So does class dump. Anyone use that? Class dump allows you to basically get the classes and dump them from the binary, and then strings. Strings is the best tool known to man. So what I did here, I'm going to have to tell you what I did. I basically took show error and show success and turned those into dynamic method resolution methods. So what I did here, I'm just going to play it here because it doesn't show up either way. Is what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that show methods, and those actually won't show up now. So to me, as the assessor anyway, for someone who may not have the code, I wouldn't necessarily know that those methods exist anymore. Okay? Again, it's not perfect. It's one of those if you have to type solutions. But there are better ones. Use pure Swift. Okay? What that means is don't turn on the damn Objective-C bridge. Once you do that, all bets are off, okay? Because that gets everything confused, and you can actually still sort of use Cycrypt when that bridge is turned on. Yeah?
If you work purely in Swift, doesn't that add a layer of protection where clicking below the line
Yes.
reduces more risk?
Yeah. Introduces more risk?
Objective-C, direct handling of code. I was under the impression that Swift adds a better abstraction layer than Objective-C.
It does, and it makes it very, very difficult to utilize tools like Cycrypt to invoke things directly. So from protecting against that dynamic analysis, if you will, of the app, Swift is much better so far. Now, that doesn't mean that someone's not coming out with ways to do it. It is binary compatible. Runtime manipulation is very limited. It is much harder to analyze. So if I'm reviewing a Swift app, it's going to take me longer to analyze it from a dynamic perspective because it uses name mangling and things like that, which I'll show you what that means. Here, anyone had any experience with name mangling? Okay. So if you have a Swift binary, Mac comes built in with NM, and you can run that against the binary, and you're going to see some really ugly output that looks like underscore TFC8, blah, 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 blah. Okay? It's ugly. But what that piece and that one line of the hundreds of thousands or whatever dumps from the binary tells me a lot. Underscore underscore T tells me it is a Swift method that it's talking about, that it's a function, and then C is it's a class method, right? And then 8 says the next 8 characters are the name of the app. 14 says the next 14 characters are the name of the actual class. S is the type, okay? Setter or getter. So S here means it's a setter. 11 is the next 11 are the name of the method. And then it's the return value, okay? Well, you can make it easier on yourself and utilize XCrun to demangle that. So if I run that against that ugly string, it says, okay, this is swiftapp.viewcontroller.usersuccess.setter, and it returns a Swift Boolean. So again, that stuff is still there. It's just, it's harder to actually manipulate. Because instead of using cool tools like Cycrypt, I have to specifically create hooks and install those on the iOS device. And most of the time, if it's dynamic and I don't have code, I'm completely guessing. So you can imagine how much time that would take to figure out which method or which class I need to hook and modify the output, right? So in this case, basically, I'm changing the set success method to always return true. But again, how long would that take someone to actually figure out, and so on and so forth? So again, it's not a fix-all for everything, but it does make it more difficult for someone to actually bypass. Now, Swift is a weird animal because most of the time strings doesn't give you much, but for some reason there's certain apps like this one. I just downloaded it off the internet. Real simple Swift app that uses Touch ID, and it actually returns method names. I don't know why, I haven't figured it out. It doesn't turn on the Objective-C bridge. So again, it's another one of those where it's not a great solution. So really, that's not the best we can do. What is? Man, everyone's shy today. Don't use LA context for evaluation of the policy because it's no better than local pin. But instead, we want to use user presence, which is basically integrating Touch ID in the keychain. This was first implemented in iOS 8, obviously, since that's when programmers were provided the APIs to utilize Touch ID. And they actually improved it a little bit with iOS 9, and unfortunately didn't touch it at all with 10. And I'll talk about why I think that's unfortunate. It uses Secure Enclave for storage of fingerprint data, and it also uses that for keychain items, okay? So they can work together, close-knit family. So what's that look like? How does the keychain work? So today, this is from Apple documentation, so we just believe them, right? But basically, there's 3 lands. There's your applications land, which is like user land. There's the OS land, and then there's the Secure Enclave. So your application has APIs that it uses, the sec item APIs, that have to go through and utilize security daemon that has the keychain APIs built into it as well. And then it connects to the secure enclave to grab whatever you might need or set whatever you might need in the keychain. So there's like 2 layers of abstraction there where you can't directly connect to secure enclave and vice versa. So what's it look like with Touch ID? Very similar, looks the same. You have user space where you still have your same APIs. It connects to the operating system space, and it then connects to secure enclave, which manages not only the Touch ID evaluation, but it manages credential management, keychain management, and all sorts of other good things that, again, aren't directly accessible from your app. So what does it look like in code? iOS 8, it was very basic, okay? When you're setting up to use Touch ID with a keychain item in iOS 8, you have one option for user presence, and that's KSec access control user presence. That's it. That's all they provided. That's a yes or no, you're using it or you're not. So when you create your sec access control reference object, you set that as an attribute, and that value in the keychain is now protected with Touch ID, okay? In iOS 9 and 10, which with 9 is when they added them, there were more attribute options added, which is awesome. They added the ability to utilize an application level password instead of Touch ID, because a lot of people are worried about Touch ID. They allowed you to use the device passcode, so it'll prompt the user for the device passcode. You can use private keys. And then there's the ability to use Touch ID any or Touch ID current set. Can anyone explain the difference between those two? So when I'm creating that sec access control reference object, and say I wanted to use Touch ID, and I set it to k-access control Touch ID any, that means at any point in time when I request the data from the keychain, any fingerprint on the system that's registered in iOS will succeed, no matter what, if one's removed, added, whatever else. If I set it to Touch ID current set, it takes kind of a snapshot of the fingerprints that are assigned to that device. So if anything changes about those, whether one's removed, 2 or 3 are added, the next time I want to get that data and it prompts me, it will fail the Touch ID check because something about the current set has changed. Does anyone see any issue here? I've been waiting for someone to say something with these fingerprints and the way this is all managed. Is it authentication? When you open your Amazon account and it prompts you for Touch ID, is that authentication?
Device verification.
Yeah, because it could be anyone's fingerprint that was on the system, right? So that's why if I'm doing a review, I always will recommend using Touch ID current set. Because at least you have a little bit of assurance that the person that's setting it up at this point is registered on the system, and if something changes, that could cause red flags, right? But in reality, you don't ever really know who's authenticating with Touch ID, right? But we're still using it because it's convenient. Now, well, we'll get into that. So a couple things I wanted to show though with iOS 9 and 10, application passwords are a good idea, right? Because at least then it's something that that person has to know, right? That's trying to grab the data from the keychain. So maybe you want to explore using that, but then that bypasses the fact that people want to use Touch ID. Yeah. It's not convenient anymore. You already make me use too many passwords. It also has an OR function, which people really like, where you can say, let's use Touch ID current set, or if that fails, fall back to an application password. So that's kind of nice. And you guys don't necessarily need to see what it looks like. Oh shit, I'll show you. So again, my beautiful, wonderful app. The keychain stuff is in the bottom, so I'm going to enter a value. Usually this would be a username and password. And when you click Store to Keychain, now it's stored. Next time I want to get it, I'm prompted for Touch ID. That stuff isn't bypassable with the tricks that I showed you before with LA Context. Since everything is being managed in the secure enclave at this point, there's nothing for me to necessarily bypass. Like, the only way I can get that data is by successfully using Touch ID, which is interesting, right? So I use keychain dumper a lot. Anyone? Allows you to dump the keychain items and see everyone's really horrible Wi-Fi passwords that device is connected to. If anything in that keychain use Touch ID, you're going to get prompted for it because it's trying to explode the whole thing. So that's an interesting one to think about too. We could talk about keychain forever, but we won't. What about the new Mac? Anyone else a little scared about that? The touch bar? In my opinion, it's going to have the same issues, but now we're going from what I would consider a single user device to a multi-user system, right? And what's this? What are they going to do to share between Mac and iOS? Because frankly, that seems to be where they're going. Because Mac's going to have its own secure enclave, iOS has its own. Well, hey, let's just check that box and you can save all that data to the cloud. Good, right? Now, I don't want to throw a lot of FUD at you, but frankly, IBM tried this in 2004 and failed miserably. It's not going to be any different here. But the fact that all I need is my little finger to unlock my Mac now, I told the powers that be at my company, I don't think anyone should have that because it just, with the sort of data we work with and whatever else, I don't think it's probably a good idea. Especially since most of our people have root access. Now what about this? So if you're driving down the road and get pulled over for speeding, they can force you to use your fingerprint, right? To unlock your device. There's been a couple cases about that. They cannot force you to type in your password. Okay? Is it going to be the same for Macs? Something to think about. What do I want to see? I want to see some sort of programmatic delineation between fingerprints. Okay? God damn it, I wish they would have done it in 10. Why? I mean, they made no changes from 9 to 10. I mean, here's a picture of mine. You can name them whatever you want. There's got to be a way to provide some sort of delineation of whose print is what. I'm not going to preach and pretend I know what that answer is, but there's got to be a way. Also, fingerprint set up through the app itself. So you have a little more assurance that it's actually the person you think they are. And more attribute options. Some sort of way to do multi-factor on the device itself would be awesome, right? Because right now, it's not possible. And to force setup of using the fingerprint sensor or something, right? Because you can not have a passcode on your device. Why? Force the setup of it. Apple's good at forcing people to do things. Why not do that, right? All right, so in summary, don't use LA Context to evaluate the policy. Use user presence if you're going to use it. Store the username and password. Send that to the backend server, whatever else, and authenticate the user. Maybe it's an OAuth token, maybe it's JWT token, whatever it is. Understand it's not authentication. The setup is all done through the OS, right? Now with Google, there's a small ability, right? To be able to force but it's all still done through the OS. So you like if you did the LA Context to check if the device is compatible to be able to use it, and it says no, and you know it's an iOS or iPhone 5S Plus, you could be like, hey, set up Touch ID. That's about as good as you can do, right? And then they have to go out into the OS and set up Touch ID. And I really hope there's going to be more to come from Apple here. I mean, I think it's a problem that's just kind of blown under the rug. It can be better to provide more assurance because everyone's using it for authentication. You name it, they're using it. So I really hope soon that's going to happen, maybe with 11. But basically, mobile security is hard. Try harder. All right. Thanks, everyone.